Seppi. You're welcome. Happy New Year. We're starting off the new year with a great, great guest. We have Tom Woods, longtime friend of the show and friend of mine. And Tom, Happy New Year. You have the first ever You're Welcome mug.
That is awesome.
That is my gift to you.
I have no merchandise for my show. So,
is that true?
Yeah, because I feel like I'm selling so much crap as it is already. You know?
Really?
Yeah.
How are you not on the merch train?
How would I ever find the time to fit into my promotion schedule when I'm trying to promote razors and suitcases and whatever?
I think people would love to have a Tom Woods Show t-shirt.
Yeah, but that they would love to have it and that I would like to give it to them are two different things.
All right.
Too much work.
All right.
Yeah.
So there was a question I had. I spent a lot of time having an IC with you, imaginary conversation, because you and another good friend of mine, I won't mention his name, let's call him Jeff, you both have a very similar psychology, and I was trying to understand it and I couldn't, so I thought, let's suss this out. And it sounds like I'm leading you down a weird road, and I'm really not. Here's an example. You and I went to have sushi once in Florida, and one of the things that I find interesting is when you is watching someone's thought process. And that, by the way, let me ask you this. That must be a lot of fun as a dad when you see your daughters putting two and two together and learning and like talking things through. I mean, that's exciting. That's extremely exciting, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's my favorite thing. That, and when I take them to a movie that I love, or I play them a song that means something to me, and I get to experience their first experience of it is a lot of fun. So, yeah, all of that stuff I deeply cherish.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I made you go to sushi with me. And it was fascinating watching your thought process, because on the one hand, you have a socially, what was the word I used instead of, not conservative, it was, whatever. Conservative is not the word I'm looking for, but close enough. You like routine. I like routine too. And you're looking at it and you said, why am I eating this? You know, why can't I have something American, something normal? And then you caught yourself and you go, well, that's stupid. I mean, there's lots of things that I like that aren't American, that aren't normal. Let me just try it. You tried it. You didn't particularly care for it. The world didn't end. You're like, all right, now I know, right? But that impulse is something that is very foreign to my thinking, and I want to figure out where it comes from, because I find it fascinating, because it's not unique to you. Now, you are also someone, to most people, there are a lot of people who are not capable of critical thought, and I'm very dismissive of them. And this is the kind of music they listen to. This is the kind of decorating they have in their house. This is what their wife looks like. And if you give them anything outside of that, it's something they've been unfamiliar with, they dismiss it out of hand and have no problem judging it. And that, to me, is something I'm very contemptuous of. But you're not like that. And here's an example. Tell the story of how you went from being a constitutional conservative to being an anarchist.
Oh, geez. Well, that was a very difficult change for me, and it was one that I resisted for a long time. I had more or less become at least right of center guy by high school, and then I figured out the constitutional thing, and I thought, yeah, the government should be restrained to just the features, just the powers in the Constitution. Then I got exposed to Murray Rothbard and people who are called anarcho-capitalists, and I listened to their arguments, and they were saying, well, what possible reason would a government have to stay limited to those powers? It has no interest in doing so. The people who populate it have no interest whatsoever in doing so. So what you're proposing is not sustainable. It can't really work. And then secondly, they were saying to me there's an inconsistency, and that's the sort of thing that does make me think, if I'm told that I'm being inconsistent. If you say that voluntary solutions seem to work for whatever, the production of anything, why is it that all the most important things that we need in society to make it work, protection against evildoers, for example, why is that suddenly an exception? Well, okay. But it took me a solid 10 years of being badgered before I finally admitted that I needed to change my mind. It was a long, long time. And it was because, frankly, it seemed weird.
Okay.
Right? And how can this be right? How can this fringe, way out of the mainstream point of view possibly be right? It's them against what? All of human experience? Come on.
Well, and also you've mentioned to me that Lysander Spooner was a big part of this.
Yeah, I did, and I think that's true for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I read Lysander Spooner's work, No Treason, and he was just saying, you know, and I at this point, Michael, I can't remember how much of this is my embellishment of Spooner and how much is the original Spooner. But basically, he's saying, how can you look at every other aspect of your life where anything you do that's important, even if it's like buying a house, you sign documents all day long. When you go to close on a house, you're signing documents for like a half an hour. You don't even know what you're signing half the time. But meanwhile, you have the Constitution and a federal government that claims the power to draft you into the military and seize whatever of your resources it wants, and really, really invasive demands they make of you. You don't sign a thing, and everybody just presumes that you accept it. Now, what do you make of that? And there is something to that. I did not consent to this thing, and I think partly what got me on that was I would listen to people respond to Spooner, and the responses were just special pleading. The responses were so bad. They sounded like something people had memorized in third grade. Yeah. And so when I become convinced that I'm on the wrong side, or if I become convinced that I really have not been fair about something, that I've let just my gut instincts overrule my better judgment, I'm willing to go back and look again. And so it may take me a while, but I get there.
So I've been doing a little bit of reading recently about Chesterton, someone who I have an enormous amount of hatred and contempt for. I
was going to say, I think he's one of the most overrated people.
Oh, you agree?
Yeah.
I mean, he's as close to being a walrus as it's possible for a human being to be, just on the physical level. He has one brilliant point, which is why I've lifted him a few rungs in hell, as Rand said. This is, to me, the best defense of conservatism, where he says, it's paraphrasing him, he never said it this succinctly, before you tear down a fence, learn why it was put up first. So you should err on the side of not changing things, because things that have happened for a reason, even if that reason is no longer valid.
Right.
But if it's not symmetrical, whether to stick or change, if you have to go blind, stick with what's been going on.
Yeah, and that basically comes from the idea that it's easier to destroy than it is to build.
Yes.
And once you've destroyed something that turns out to have been foundational to civilization, how do you get it back again? I do need to say in parentheses, just to protect myself, because I'm going to get a lot of hate mail for the Chesterton thing. I just want to explain myself for 1 second on that. I know a lot of Catholics and non-Catholics as well. They like him. They like his fiction. They like his essays. They like his book Orthodoxy. I frankly find it overwrought, wordy, not particularly convincing. Maybe other people do. I just don't. And then when I've had to write about economics from a Catholic standpoint, people throw Chesterton at me, and I look at him, and he's taking really important, difficult questions, and he thinks that if he reduces them all to a witty aphorism, that he has answered the argument. He really hasn't. It's really, really irritating. I get these aphorisms thrown at me all day long, and this sounds to me like I'm arguing with Bernie Sanders, and not because their views are the same, but
they are the same.
Because it's but it's mainly that they boil down life to a bumper sticker and they throw it at me.
So I'm reading Max Eastman's book right now, his critique of communism and socialism. Max Eastman was a former hardcore communist. Yeah. He translated Trotsky's books into English, and he totally repudiated it after a lot of data came forward. And he quotes Chesterton. I looked it up. Chesterton believed in something called distributism.
Oh, yeah, did he ever? Yes.
Which is, to me, I'd rather someone be a communist. Because in the same way that I'd rather someone be an atheist or a theist than an agnostic, it's like you're trying to straddle the fence. And there's a book by George H. Smith called Atheism, the Case Against God, and he makes the point, you're either an agnostic theist or an agnostic atheist. You don't have this third option. You either have the belief or you don't.
Right.
Certainty is a separate subject. And this distributism is so banal. It's so clearly a weaseling out of taking a position where it's like, okay, we're not going to have communism where everything's owned by the government. And obviously freedom is not good because some people have more. So we're going to somehow make it so property is distributed somewhat evenly throughout society. It's like, all right, you are the devil.
I have dealt with these people. I have a chapter on distributism in my book, The Church and the Market.
Oh, okay.
And I've dealt with these people for a long time, and most of the people who take that view, I don't know what the connection is, are very, very vicious debating you. It's really, I would almost rather deal with Hillary Clinton supporters than these folks. It's
Vicious
nasty.
how?
Nasty. Well, they don't really want to engage you on the merits of what you're saying.
You're just a bad person.
It's that, you're a devil spawned by the Enlightenment kind of thing.
Oh, boo-hoo.
So with the distributists, you described it exactly right. And what's also part of that is they don't like the division of labor, because everybody should be in some way, if not completely self-sufficient, partially self-sufficient. You should be making some of your own stuff. You shouldn't be integrated into a global economy, because there's something internationalist and weird about that. But I think back to, I know a lot of people who came from big families and they could barely afford to clothe themselves. But thanks to globalization, they can clothe themselves. Whereas 40 years ago, you're paying like $40 for a baby outfit. What a ripoff! So I don't shed tears for anything like that. But the distributist thing really boils down to, they're not going to tell you how they're going to do it.
Right.
And every time you say, look, the state would have to be involved, they say, oh, you're so caught up in this communism versus socialism dichotomy, or capitalism versus socialism dichotomy. We don't have to think that way. But you do have to tell me how this is going to work. And then secondly, if they're going to say, we have to keep businesses, at a certain size. We can't let them expand. We can't let them move vertically or horizontally. We can't let them get bigger or wider. Well, who makes that decision? If I have a bakery, do I have to go to the distributors planning board to find out if I can also sell cakes in addition to pastries? And they're going to tell me if I have to just stick to pastries? Who's going to make that decision? Why not just see who the best baker is?
And it's one of those things where it sounds objective, like we don't want it to get too big. And then you go, okay, what number is too big? And they'll have no clue of an answer.
It's all arbitrary. And they glorify the medieval guilds. They say, here's how it should have been, because with the medieval guilds, you didn't have dog-eat-dog competition because there were guild regulations. So if one particular shop, let's say, found some cheap supply of some input, well, he had to tell everybody about that cheap supply. Isn't this great? Everybody cooperated. How it actually worked was that they went so out of their way to make sure that you were not allowed to distinguish your shop from anybody else's, that you were not even allowed to stand outside your shop and sneeze. If you sneezed, you're drawing undue attention to your shop. This is not a way, this is unbelievable regimentation. It's not a way to run anything. And that's what they look to as a model. I don't look to that as a model.
No.
Let people shop where they want to shop and sell what they want to sell on whatever terms they want to sell it.
So now I want to talk about inspiration.
All right.
One of the things that used to be in the culture in the 2000s and has kind of faded away now is if someone had said, if you want to fight, let's figure out what Osama bin Laden wants, right? If you said that after 9/11, you were looked at as a lunatic, whereas the point, which is, and most people said this sincerely because they couldn't understand the point is, if you're going to fight someone, you really should understand what their motivations are. I am absolutely certain Dwight Eisenhower spent a lot of time thinking what the Nazis wanted, what Hitler wanted.
Right.
Lee and Grant both spent a lot of time thinking about how the other person thinks. This is 101. In fact, it's impossible to have any conflict where you're not studying your opponent's thought process.
Well, a detective wants to know what the motive for a crime is. It doesn't mean he's excusing the crime.
Or validating it.
Yeah.
Right? So, but it's just like if you say we have to look at things from Osama bin Laden's point of view, oh my goodness,
you
want
my
9/11.
gosh, yeah.
So this was and you see this, and it's people who aren't necessarily, they're marginally intelligent, the 115 IQs, and that's the ones who are really dangerous. And it's just like it's like on the one level you're smarter than average, on the other hand there's no mind there. You're not capable of critical thought. And one other example of this is Ayn Rand, who, for people who don't know, Ayn Rand was a popular vampire novelist back in the day. She was the Candace Owens of her time. When she was first starting out to be an author, she had journals where she was thinking out loud. And those journals were recently published by the Ayn Rand Institute. Not recently, in the 90s, I believe. And there was one, thought process. It never went anywhere, for a book or a short story called The Little Street. And she was inspired by this murderer, this kid who killed people in real life, and she wanted to write a book that showed that he was condemned not for the actual murdering, but because of his heterodox personality. Meaning people didn't really hate him because he was a killer. They hated him because he wasn't playing by their rules, right?
Yeah.
So she could, in a sense, could be said to have been inspired by this. And people online still bring this up like, oh, she's inspired by mass murderer. And it's like, well, that's kind of the plot of The Stranger, Camus' book, which is indisputably regarded as one of the great classics of modern literature, where it starts off with the senseless murder by Meursault, the protagonist of this Arab, and then he's condemned not for the murder but for these other reasons. And it's an interesting look into human psychology. And there's a difference between inspiration and admiration. Do you not agree?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my point is this. So so you know how, like, you were saying when you and your kids put two and two together, a lot of times when I talk to you about stuff, and my other friend, what I say his fake name was? Jeff. I'll talk to you about things that I find inspiring, and it doesn't register. And this is what I wanted to get to today, because I have established, and this is what's fascinating to me when you think things through. Once you eliminate what is the most obvious answer, then you're left with a bunch of choices, and it's fun to think things through. And so the most obvious answer would be, not for you, but in general, okay, this person's not capable of critical thought, or they just are, hidebound thinkers. That's not the case here. You are very capable of critical thought, and when you come across weird things, you're like, you know what? Yeah, this is weird, but I'm going to accept it on its terms, even if there was an emotional aversion. But to me, when I talk to you guys, it's almost like there's this, like anosmia is when people are not capable of smelling. Like it's like almost the capacity isn't there. And I'm curious whether this is biological on some level. And I'll give you an example because you brought it up at the restaurant. Bobby, let's put up the picture of Dee Snider. So I've got a chart. Okay. And I want you to tell me at what point on this chart you want to hit the brakes. Okay.
Okay.
Because wait, as you know, you're a historian. You have your doctorate.
Yeah.
So before you get to the Constitution, you have to get to the Articles of Confederation. Before you get to the Articles of Confederation, you have to have John Locke. Before you have John Locke, you have Hobbes, and you have Magna Carta, right? So this is a process. So these things don't come out of nowhere, right? And culturally, my big thesis, and I got this very heavily from Thaddeus Russell and from Camille Paglia, and I talk about this in my forthcoming book, it's the people on the margins who make culture. And at a certain point, that culture is made palatable for the masses, but it still is rooted in unpalatable things. That's the thesis I'm operating under, right? So you brought up Dee Snider. Let's put up Dee Snider. This is Dee Snider. Now, Dee Snider, you're showing to your kids.
Those videos from the 80s are hilarious.
They're hilarious.
Yeah.
So it's Dee Snider is a guy in makeup. He looks like a comic book character.
But it's so over the top that it's like a self-parody.
It is a self-parody.
Yeah.
It's absolutely over the top and ridiculous. Okay. So far, if you're showing it to your kids, you're fine with it, right?
The videos are hilarious.
No, but I mean, this is not degenerate.
Well, I wouldn't say it's the apex of civilization either, but it's entertaining.
It's entertaining.
And it's harmless
right.
entertainment.
It's harmless.
Yeah.
So Dee Snider was very heavily influenced by the New York Dolls. Are you familiar with the New York Dolls?
No.
The New York Dolls, one of them became Buster Poindexter.
Okay.
So put up the New York Dolls. So this was them. They're from the early 70s in New York. These were all...
I'll put my glasses on. I left them out there.
No. Go back. Blow it up, Bobby. You could just Google that picture if you need another one.
There we go.
Okay. There were five punks, straight dudes. They, on purpose, dressed like this to mess with people because they knew it would upset them. They're in full face paint. And they were very hard musically.
Yeah.
Right? So is this something you're comfortable with? And why is one okay and this one not okay? Or vice versa?
Well, as I say, I think in the case of Dee Snider, it's because, you take one look at him, you can't really take it seriously, right? And he's so overdoing, like, every physical action in the old videos, like, we're not going to take it,
right?
That I don't feel like this is anything other than somebody just having a good time. Whereas if somebody, and look, I don't feel like you can't. You think back to how the Soviet Union tried to manage culture.
Sure.
And you see that you cannot do that. I mean, it does have to emerge spontaneously. And it shouldn't be given either artificial... It shouldn't be
that's a good picture. Blow that up, Bobby.
Shouldn't be given artificial support one way or the other, because that's going to distort it. In general, for the most part, I feel like the people who should, for lack of a better term, police culture, are the consumers of culture. And if people find something to be objectionable, then they don't consume it. I mean, that really is the only.
Okay, this is a sidebar. I'm talking about you personally.
Yeah, me
'cause
personally.
I want to understand your thought process.
So,
look at that picture. Is that something that you?
Yeah, no. Okay, so the reason is I'm trying to distinguish between Dee Snider and these people. I mean, now it could be that they're on some level that it's an arbitrary distinction that I'm making. I don't think it is, but I'm willing to consider the possibility. But I think the whole we're gonna be ambiguous about gender or play.
But they're not trying to be ambiguous. They're clearly straight men, the New York Dolls. Just take my word for it. We're going to get to the ambiguity later, but go ahead.
Okay. I mean, like when I feel like what's being done is not just we're going to be experimental because that's part of the warp and woof of life itself. That's one thing. But if it's more we're going to do this to be in your face to offend your bourgeois sensibilities, that just seems juvenile to me.
Okay,
it holds no attraction.
Put up Ziggy, Bobby. So this is David Bowie as Ziggy Stardust.
And I know you and I totally disagree about David Bowie.
So is this something you're fine with?
No, he always creeped me out. Sorry.
Really?
Yeah. I think he's total. I know there are people who say he's a great, amazing musician. Couldn't get into it. Tried.
That's not what I'm asking. I'm not asking if you respond to his music. I'm saying when you look at this picture and what he represents in culture, is this something that is, are you getting out the car? Are you comfortable with this? Would you show this to your kid, a Ziggy Stardust video?
No, I mean, I'm not super duper. I mean, as I said, I don't care for his music or his persona. But I just don't think I'd have a reason to. I don't think I'd have a reason to show it to them.
Okay. Put up the photo of Bowie in the dress. So this was a big deal in the early 70s, right? This is Bowie. He wore a dress on his album cover. And to me, if you look at it nowadays, it looks ridiculous and silly.
Yeah.
Is this something you think is a problem on a personal level?
I guess if you mean, does it provoke a visceral reaction?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess it does.
Would you think it's appropriate? And I don't think I'm not saying there's a right answer or wrong answer, honestly. Like if Walmart had that in the store, would you think that's a problem?
I don't think I'd go to the trouble of organizing a boycott if that's what you mean.
No, what I mean is like there's lots of, like if there was nudity on a CD cover, I would think that's a problem at Walmart because children are walking by here and they shouldn't be seeing naked people. Like I completely get that. What about this though? I'm trying to figure out how the thought process works because it's alien to me. No pun intended vis-a-vis Bowie.
Well, then, if it's alien to you, if you don't think it's a big deal, why is he doing it?
No. He's doing it for several. It's not a big deal now. It was a big deal in '72 when this happened, and they banned this. And I don't. To me, I want to understand why. I could not predict whether you thought this was a big deal or not because you were comfortable with Dee Snider. Dee Snider to me is a lot more extreme than this.
I know. But as I say, for there, I'm willing to admit that this could just be, I remember this from my youth. I have fond memories of my youth, whereas I have no recollection of David Bowie. So the sentimental attachment's not there.
Right.
But I don't think it's exactly a stretch to say that there are people who want to dismantle just the structures of the way people have lived for a long time. And so I don't feel obligated to celebrate that. And so if I see something that I feel like is obviously not just an innocent choice of attire, but that is obviously meant to send a message about what the agenda is, I don't see why I would want to stand up and cheer.
You're talking generalities. I'm asking about specifics. Like when you look at that picture, because Pollia talks about this a lot. I mean, I know. Are you familiar with her work?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Right. So she just talks about iconography and how that changes people's perception of gender and things like that, and so on and so forth. So to me, like an art history class, right? This was a very important image for its time. Now, important is kind of an evasion because important could mean really, really bad, or important could mean important in terms of music, or it could be important in terms of breaking down cultural barriers. It could be anywhere in the map. When you look at that, this is something that I'm trying to understand. This is something you're not comfortable with at this point.
Yeah, I mean, to say I'm not comfortable with it, I don't want to sound like I'm some little delicate flower, like, oh, I'm uncomfortable. It's just that it's not something I'd want to support, but I'm not cowering under a desk. Like, I don't want to give the impression that I'm some wimp or something, that images make me feel weird. It's that I look at that and I say, well, all right. I mean, You know, this is especially these days. This is sort of a dime a dozen. I know where you're going with this. I'm not impressed.
Well, this was 72. If it was these days, I agree with you. This is a dime a dozen.
Yeah, but again, yeah. So these days you'd have to go to a lot, farther extreme to elicit the same reaction. But that just goes to show that kind of goes to prove why I'm right initially. That obviously things do, as you were saying earlier, it's not like the U.S. Constitution just emerged out of nothing.
Right.
There's a long buildup to it. And so it's true that at some point, as we go back into the past, I'll be able to say, this seems harmless enough. But at the same time, there are other stages where I say, I obviously know how this movie turns out.
But my point is, and I want to know if you agree, you can't have Dee Snider without Bowie.
I could live with that.
That's not what I'm saying, though. I'm not saying you can live with it. You can't live with it. The point is, Thaddeus Russell's thesis, he's been on your show, is that it's basically the degenerates who are, and I'm sure Bowie was regarded as a degenerate for doing that, who brings us to a point, and now, 15 years later, or 10, Dee Snider's early 80s, it's something that people can show their kids.
Yeah, I get that. Can that possibly be a universal theory of culture? I mean,
yes.
Haydn composed over 100 symphonies. Did he start off as a degenerate?
I don't think Haydn's high culture. I'm talking specifically about low culture and mass culture.
All right. Well, but even then, I mean, but the thing is, symphony's high culture today, but a long time ago, symphony and opera would not have been as high culture. That's what you have.
I maybe you're right. I can't. Okay. Let's deal with the last 150 years.
Okay. So what do you want? What do you want?
My point is, I mean, do you disagree that basically the Thaddeus Russell's thesis that you can't have Dee Snider without having Bowie first?
I don't know. I don't know. I'd have to wrestle with that. But as I say, I can. I don't know. I don't know how to proceed on this.
Okay,
because it doesn't matter to me that much. That stuff doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter to you where culture comes from.
Well, I don't. I generally don't go by. I don't believe in these sort of universal theories about, because I don't think that holds. I mean, I think
let's say America. Forget universal. Let's say just America.
But
let's say America. Strictly American culture. Do you disagree? I mean, do you think American pop culture is, in my view, it's as important as the U.S. military in terms of spreading American ideas throughout the world?
Yep.
So if we're, and it's far preferable because you're not killing people, right? So if you are getting American culture as a mechanism of cultural imperialism, for lack of a better term, I mean, isn't it something that we should figure out, how did this come to be?
I guess we could. I guess so. But I feel like it's not. I don't know. As I say, I don't have a full-blown theory of it, but I do think that, I mean, there's clearly a difference between what, I mean, there's obviously a cultural divide in the U.S. that has existed for a long time, whereby there are people who want to steer culture in a particular direction because they have political goals, and they want culture to serve those goals. And this culture is basically rammed down the throats of everybody else who are not actively trying to shape it. And I mean, I don't know. I don't think
I don't think it's necessarily a political thing, though. I think it's I mean, when you're looking at all these musicians, I don't think any of them are thinking, I'm an agent of the Democratic Party, or I'm an agent of the state.
No, but political doesn't have to mean that. It can mean, I mean, they obviously have some kind of a desired end result. I mean, you don't do some of the things that they do and write about the things they write about without having some kind of a desired end result.
I don't know that that's true. Like, a lot of times, like, people who put out memes on the internet, right? They don't necessarily have an end result. They just want to stir shit up and see what happens.
That's true, but some of them do.
Some of them do, sure. But I mean, I think most people don't know what they're doing. I think most people are not thinking the long game, especially young artists. Yeah,
that's true. But as they become older artists, I think they do.
Sure.
And I mean,
and they take themselves seriously.
It's not even. It's not like it's particularly subtle either. I mean, I don't think I have to. hire a private detective exactly to figure out generally what most people involved in a lot of aspects of American popular culture would like to see as their desired outcome. And basically, it's the society we have now. I mean, I think that is what they want.
Do you think it was wrong, in any sense of the word, for Rand to have been inspired by this mass murderer or serial killer?
But how do we mean inspired?
Meaning she saw something of value in his story that she can create art in the broad sense with.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I can find parallels of that.
Meaning, so it's not wrong.
I don't think it's not acceptable.
Right. Well, is it better to be inspired in your view? How are you inspired? What inspires you in your writing?
Now, what inspires me is not like an example of somebody, anything like that. What inspires me is frustration and anger at the way people spread misinformation.
Are there certain specific people that inspire you that you see them maybe living or dead, and you're like, yeah, like right on, and like you draw from them? Because I have a pantheon.
Okay, well, sure, but I mean, some of them are boring.
Yeah, but that's if it's inspiring, it's not boring in a sense. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, for me, even though he gets criticized a lot, most of the criticism is BS. The historian Paul Johnson, I don't agree with him on everything.
He's amazing.
Yeah. He inspires me
because
of his output and his
I'll tell you Paul Johnson's
knowledge.
Story. I read his A History of the American People, and there were so many typos. I took it a point to correct all of them, and I sent him a letter for the paperback, and he sent me back a letter thanking me. And by the way, you know, he is a degenerate.
Yeah, I know all. I've read. I didn't realize that, but
he is a much bigger degenerate than Bowie.
Yeah,
or the New York Dolls. Yeah.
So I guess with me, it's people who accomplish a lot. They inspire me to accomplish a lot. I mean, it really isn't.
But who are the names?
Which could be more exciting than that. But
give us the names.
Well, Murray Rothbard's a great example. Okay. But at some point, you have to decide in your life what is ultimately important to you. And I was never going to be able to produce as much as Rothbard did.
Sure.
But it also would have been wrong of me even to try, because Rothbard had no children and I have 5. And I have to get my priorities right. So I don't want to have somebody who inspires me who's at a level that I would just get frustrated if I tried to copy. I'm not trying to copy these people.
I'm not talking about aspiration. I'm talking about inspiration.
Yeah. But somebody like him who wasn't thinking about the bottom line, who, if he were thinking about the bottom line, could have just gotten a fancy academic position somewhere and said what they wanted him to say, and he had the intellect to do it. But instead, he was happy to remain in obscurity and churn out what he churned out and just let the chips fall where they may. That's a scary and lonely place to be. And then even he would have, like, for example, National Review magazine. A lot of those people would have liked his economics, but he just couldn't come on board with the rest of the conservative program. And so rather than say, well, I guess I'll just hold my nose and stick with these people, he just thought, even if this isolates me further, I just can't bring myself to do it. That inspires me. And that is how I've tried to be over the years. I mean, I've never been published in National Review. Rothbard had, but I haven't.
Is there any... Okay, let's put it this way. Can you name someone who inspires you who is not dealing with politics or economics? Just someone who inspires you on a personal level.
Jeez, so most of my friends, like people on a personal level that I know whom I look up
But
to.
I just mean historically.
No, I know. But the thing is, I take most of my inspiration from the real life flesh and blood examples of people I see every day.
That's so we're wired completely differently.
Yeah, I wouldn't look at history and say, boy, that Napoleon, I wish I could be like that guy. Or,
but he's too mainstream.
I wish I could be as devoted to reason as Socrates is. I don't think he was devoted to reason enough. I mean, don't drink the hemlock.
Yeah,
what is this BS about the Athenian state? Stop that.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I mean, all the people I think about, they're all boring scholars. I like Thomas Aquinas, the fact that in his
very
day...
inspirational.
But I'm inspired
St.
by
Thomas? I mean, how many people he might be one of the most inspirational figures of all time.
Okay, but
Ayn Rand was inspired by him.
the fact that
The vampire novelist.
I mean, in his day, he would say to himself, "Look, there are sources in the Islamic world that I can learn from. So if it's Avicenna or Averroes, I can learn from them, and I'm going to write about them. Or Jewish thinkers like Maimonides, I can learn from him. And the ancient, like obviously Aristotle was the philosopher for him. He can get something from all of them, and he can build on what they were trying to build. And these days we get this impression that Western civilization's all been about oppressing other groups, but for Thomas it was a search for truth, and he's willing to read anything he can read to find what anybody else happens to have stumbled upon. And that is a great example to me, and I try to do that, and sometimes I catch myself not doing it, but I want to be like that guy. I want to be like that guy who, and I know some people are going to say, Woods, you're exactly the opposite of this. I know, I'm trying. I didn't say I was there already. But the fact that he can look at somebody's argument and come up with 3 more arguments for that guy, state them better than that guy could, and then knock them all down, that's pretty darn good.
Okay, now I figured out how to reframe the question to get the answer I want.
Okay.
And there might not be an answer, because this might be a way that you and I are fundamentally wired differently.
Yeah.
Is there someone who you find inspirational whose life you would never want to have anything like? That you do not think is a good person at all? Or admirable person at all?
Shoot.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
I need time for something like this.
So if you don't have an answer off the top of your head, that's telling.
Yeah.
That's my answer.
Yeah, I don't.
That's so interesting. That is a fundamental difference in our thinking. And I don't know, this isn't a right or wrong. These are just 2 different approaches to, because I'm usually like the cerebral nerd, but you are more cerebral than I am, I think it's fair to say. And this is the Apollo-Dionysus split. Camille Paglia, let's go back to her.
It surely is.
One of the points she made is that one of her famous quotes that she's very proud of, rightfully, is that the reason there's no female Mozart is that there's no female Jack the Ripper. That men are at the margins, and you have the geniuses and you have the lunatics, right? And her other point is that in creating artistry and art, there's a certain mania, a certain almost literal psychosis associated with it. And it seems like all the people you're inspired by, none of them are these like degenerates or loons.
Yeah, no, that just doesn't.
It doesn't resonate with you.
No, it doesn't. It just
on an emotional level.
And the thing is, it could also be that I was never one to read biographies. I almost never know the life story of any of the people whose art or writing or any other products I encounter. I don't know the story behind it. I don't know what kind of life they lived. Maybe it was very exciting and inspirational.
But you also don't care.
But I don't know anything about it.
And you don't care.
Well, I mean, I feel like if I had a few extra lifetimes, I would learn a lot more about a lot more things.
You have time to read 2 or 3 biographies in your life. You've read a lot of books.
Yeah, it's true. It's just a question of...
It's just not a priority for you. It's not an interest.
No, yeah. It's just
that is so interesting to me.
But the thing is, though, if you recommended a biography to me, you said, look, this guy, you're just going to love reading about him, I would believe you, and I would read it, and I bet I would love it.
I would never do it, and here's why. The reason this whole came up is I was bidding on an auction, which was a once in a lifetime thing, for what I thought, for someone named Candy Darling. It's a long story. Do not look her up. And I realized if I sat down and talked to you about why I want this autograph so much and how much it means, you would smile and nod, but on a fundamental level, it would not resonate with you. And there is nothing I would be able to say that would get it to resonate with you. And I know that you're not a bad person. You are extremely capable of critical thought. You are very open-minded. If I sat you down and go, Tom, hear me out, you would hear me out, as you did with Lysander Spooner. And yet at a fundamental level, I wouldn't be able to get through. And I still, even after discussing this, don't understand how that is. And I don't know what is happening. It's just very interesting to me.
Yeah, I don't know if it's biological or environmental. I don't know. But honestly, yeah, it's so strange to me that I would sit here and be completely stumped by such a simple question.
But it's not simple because I think it goes deep into our how our minds work, and those questions which are simple have been thousands of years in the making. People still don't have answers, and I think it was Jonathan Haidt, and I'm sure someone will correct me. They make the point of conservatives versus liberals, which neither of us are. Conservative, it's the idea that the psychology informs the ideology, right? So conservatives in general are people who are averse to new experiences, new thoughts, right? Not having a passport is highly correlated with being a conservative, right? As opposed to liberals who like, oh, if anything's new, I want it.
Right.
Right. Oh, it's French chocolate. Oh, it must be better than Hershey's.
Right.
Oh, Swedish music. Yeah. Oh, forget this garbage. Swedish garbage is going to be much better because it's from Sweden.
Right.
And these are psychological mindsets which inform our perception. And yet how that happens to begin with, I have no idea and you have no idea. And it's very easy for each one to say the other is wrong and stupid, but it's kind of like we don't know where it comes from to begin with.
It amazes me that as I'm sitting here thinking, oh, come on, now there have to be people that you just say, look, I may not agree, let's say, with how that person led his life, but man, what a life on some level.
Well, Hamilton.
Yeah, but even there, it's not even his biographical details are the best part of Hamilton.
That's what I was talking about, was the biographical details. But you don't find him inspirational.
Yeah, and that could just be because the other side of him I just can't abide, and so it makes it hard for me. Kevin Gutzman is able to appreciate both sides. He doesn't care for the politics, but he thinks he's got, I mean, you saw what he said, you know, he's got one of the great stories ever. Yeah, it's... Yeah, I know. Jeez, it's worse than I thought, Michael.
But how is it worse? It's just fascinating.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like as I sit here, I feel like I'm in a doctor-patient relationship with myself. Like, why? You know, it seems to be like it seems like I shouldn't be this way. But
I don't think "should" applies here. Is my point. I think how and why is much more interesting. Should is a value judgment, and it's very easy to have the shoe on the other foot and be like, you know, like Chesterton. If you have to choose between being inspired by people who lived virtuous lives and being inspired by degenerates, go with the first one.
I guess
I can make that argument very easily.
I guess one thing that really hits me when somebody does it, and I guess I can think of people outside of politics and economics, is when there are people who just soldier on regardless of what their critics say. They just soldier on.
Sure.
Because they know what they're doing is valuable, and they just soldier on. And so, for example, we could say...
No, we got the best example of all time. Come on. When Rand was on Donahue, and he said, your critics say this and this, and she goes, can I say one thing? He goes, what? I don't give a damn what my critics say.
Yeah.
Because I haven't met a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's it. Well, I don't know if it was you or somebody I was telling recently, Beethoven's a good example where he is alleged to have said, Vox Populi, Vox Dei, I never believed it. And then he was asked, why do you think people enjoy the 8th Symphony? No, I beg your pardon. It's the other way around. Nobody listens to the Beethoven 8th Symphony.
Yeah,
he said, it's why do you think people enjoy the 7th Symphony more than the 8th? And his answer was, because the 8th is better.
Yeah.
He doesn't care, right? Does not care. Or a more recent example on a much lower level, and it's I came up to New York much earlier this year on one of my trips to see Steven Wilson, who's a musician I admire very much. And there are a couple things I like about him, and one of them is totally anomalous for this conversation. But the first one is he never reads his critics. Now, that may be an extreme case. He doesn't read them. I mean, even if they're saying he's brilliant, he does not read them. And then he says to his fans, look, I'm doing this as much for myself as I am for you. And I hope everybody likes it, but ultimately, this is what I want to do. And so the thing about him that will seem a little strange after this particular conversation is he never stays still as an artist. Everything he produces sounds different from the previous thing.
Well, he's clearly inspirational to you.
He is, but he's not well known.
But that's what makes it great. It's a personal hero.
What I like about him is that he says, I don't want to repeat myself. He means that musically. I don't want to repeat myself. So his last album had a song on it that sounded like almost like it was inspired by ABBA. And he said, well, you know what? When I was growing up, I kind of liked ABBA. It's not all depressing, progressive music. I also liked this too. So he just went out and made it, and he said, now look, I know some of you people aren't going to like it, but I'm doing it because this is what I feel like doing. And the thing is, when he would perform this song live, he would basically tell all the nerds in the audience who had their arms folded, I'm not going to stand up for this song. He would say, stand up, and we're going to play it. And by the end, everybody was standing.
Sid Vicious from the Sex Pistols, who possibly killed his girlfriend and then OD'd not long after at the age of like 20 or 21 or 22, was obsessed with ABBA. And in fact, when they came to New York, he went to the airport to kind of meet them, and they were freaked out. This was not ironic. Patti Smith, who was one of the first punks, and very grungy in her own way, would sing You Light Up My Life. And she sang it on national television, and people thought she was being ironic. She goes, no, it's a beautiful song. It makes me happy. And what I find contemptible, and is very much a function of this kind of progressive, too cool for school, holier than thou, puritanical approach, is this cynicism and snide, this like, oh, you like low culture? It's like, okay. And it's like, screw you.
Yeah.
ABBA, do you know how hard it is to write a song where people all over the world for decades, you hear it and you put a smile on your face and you hear it 100 times and you're still not sick of it, and you know it's not Beethoven and you're not trying to be Beethoven, and you could share with your kids? You are the enemy. ABBA's not the enemy. They're the heroes here.
I have to say, even though, I mean, on some level, everybody kind of likes ABBA.
Yes.
But it's not the first kind of music I go to.
Let me say one more thing. And if you don't like ABBA, that's fine. But that doesn't make you edgy.
Cool because you didn't like it. You're right.
Yeah.
But I can at least appreciate that what you just said, what they're doing is very difficult. I mean, that's what made Paul McCartney such a great songwriter, that he could come up with these memorable melodies, month after month, year after year. The Beatles were putting out 2 albums a year for a while. 2 albums a year. These days you're lucky to get 1 album every 3 years out of some of these bums. They're putting 2, and they would have so many I mean, Yesterday, Penny Lane.
That's my favorite one of their songs.
Perfect, right?
That's my favorite one of their songs.
I mean, lyrically and musically, perfect. And he could now, as a solo artist, not as many, but he churned them out again and again and again. And even if that's not your kind of music, you have to admit, for what that's supposed to be, he's great at it.
So you find him inspirational.
I do, even though, and that's a life I wouldn't want to live. Yeah. I wouldn't want to live Paul McCartney's life.
And you don't find him admirable on a personal level necessarily.
No, I mean, there's some things I can respect about him.
But other things I can...
Other things I don't. Yeah. But it wasn't just the amount of his output. It was that he could produce that much output and have it be so memorable, all of it. I mean, basically all of it.
And so different.
And so different. And yeah, I mean, now the Beatles, a lot of their early stuff is kind of interchangeable. I mean, at least the first few. Who knows which album?
Okay, hold on. So why is it that when Bowie's in a dress, it's like, all right, this is try hard, to know what you're going for. But when the Beatles go to India, it's not the same.
Because I think the Beatles eventually regretted going to India.
I don't think they didn't. What's his name? George Harrison die like a Hindu?
Well,
or Buddhist,
I don't say they regret every aspect of
Sure.
it, but they did have some problems with the Maharishi.
Sure. Okay.
And there's some controversy about whether that really happened or not. But I don't feel like they. Well, you know what? I'm probably wrong about this, because I think they went to see the Maharishi in '68. When Sgt. Pepper had already come out. And on Sgt. Pepper, there's a sitar song called Within You, Without You.
Yeah.
That's very Eastern spiritual motivated. So they were already kind of promoting that a bit. But I guess I just didn't feel as lectured to by that.
I know what's going on here. I think
okay,
it just clicked
tell
on
me.
Bowie.
Tell me.
You think fairly that there is a conscious, intentional assault on concept of gender in this country. And therefore, it is impossible to separate these artistic choices from the past, because they have been seized on and appropriated by these people for their purpose, and now those purposes involving children.
Okay, I would say it is primarily that, yes.
Yeah.
And then also, even if I tried, just know... like, you just can't avoid. It's the idea that I can't even just enjoy some music without being propagandized.
But the point is that there is no propaganda in the music in 72. The propaganda is now it's being retroactively appropriated.
That's true.
Is my point.
Yeah, yeah. But it's
you know what it is? It's exactly like this. It's the same people who say that song "Baby, It's Cold Outside" can't be played, or they look at Walt Disney and say, "Oh, this is racist imagery, we shouldn't show it," or Little Rascals, "Oh, we got buckwheat, we can't show this," right?
Yeah.
They are retroactively assigning meaning to it as opposed to looking at it as a function of the time.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think what's happening here with Bowie and all these other stuff, and I always go to Bowie because I think he's the greatest musician ever, is they are appropriating it for their specific political
But you don't
agenda.
think Bowie at the time thought, I'm going to screw with these people a little?
He did, but there's a difference between screwing with these people and I am putting forth an agenda to redefine things for the sake of my attempt to dominate American culture. These are very different concepts. He was absolutely screwing with people. Bowie also said he was a Nazi and gave the Nazi salute at a later point. Okay, so that's clearly him screwing with people. Sid Vicious used to walk around New York City with a swastika t-shirt and a lock on a dog collar on his neck. You know, it's clearly he's not a Nazi. He's just, okay, I'm going to screw with people and upset them. Absolutely. But now it's being seen by you to some extent fairly as a function of this current political milieu.
Well, and it's also, it's not even just from the point of view of, let's say, a Christian right kind of response. It's also just the regular guy on the street tired of being badgered all the time.
Yeah, I don't need to know your pronoun.
Yeah.
Just wear a dress, just leave me alone.
Yeah. And the thing is, I think a lot of these folks, they don't really go out of their way saying, let me try to offend people who are different from. I think on a personal level,
they don't care.
They just want to.
They don't care.
You know, whatever you want, we'll try to accommodate you, but don't spend your time telling me how stupid and backward I am, because then that's probably not going to work out well.
Right. Yeah. Right. And in the same way that, like, oh, you don't like country music, you don't like rhinestones? Fine. Don't listen to my country music. Don't look at the rhinestones. Live your life. Like, why are you coming to me and making me listen to Bowie or whatever? I don't care.
And I know I'll get in trouble for this too, but look, I had the Back in Black album when I was a young kid in
Rolling
high school.
Stones?
AC/DC.
Okay.
And I know, obviously, they had a different lead singer by then, but basically, I'm going to just go out on a limb and say, once you heard one AC/DC album, you've heard them all.
Okay.
But that's not true with, I was giving the example of the Beatles. By the time you get to Rubber Soul, but primarily Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, and on, they're producing something new and interesting, and you've got that. I'm walking into your trap.
No, honestly, I don't know what
but
I'm going to say next.
It's something you've not heard before from them every single time. And that's what I like about Steven Wilson. It's what I like about Jethro Tull. It's not the same thing. It's that they could just keep producing the same thing and probably do really well. They don't have to go to the trouble of recreating the sound every single time. But they do it because they don't want to be AC/DC. And if you like AC/DC, go knock yourselves out. But the fact that an artist goes above and beyond what's strictly necessary to put food on his table and takes a risk every time by producing something his listeners have never heard before, that I like. I guess I like that.
We're going to have to talk about this more after my book comes out, and both of us sit and think about this, because there's a lot of stuff here to chew on, and it's making me question my own thought process. So Polly's, the reason, I read Polly in high school, so at a very formative time, and her, for those of you who don't know, Polly, her new book out is called Provocations, which is an absolute masterpiece. It's a collection of all her essays. It's the best book of hers by far, because the other ones were just kind of like hodgepodges or more specific. Her first book, Sexual Personae, was her thesis. And it was about the androgyne in history and art. So basically, androgyne is ideas of gender. You have male, female, and then mixed gender, and how that's changed throughout history. And she goes from Nefertiti to Emily Dickinson in contemporary times as well. So because that was kind of what I cut my teeth on when I was growing up philosophically, I see so much of culture in the vein of that. But that is completely alien to your analysis. And you're not even analyzing culture much at all.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, I just react to it.
Yeah.
I've thought about a lot of things in my life, but on this, I've just kind of let other people.
But it's interesting because I think, and I know you agree, that it's one of the most important issues because it drives everything else.
No, I know it.
So that's what's fascinating to me, that you agree with that on every level, and yet you're still like, it's not for me.
I think it's because
In the same way that I'm not, you know what, people ask me why I say I'm an anarchist and not an anarcho-capitalist, and I always say truthfully, I'm more comfortable defending anarchism than capitalism.
Yeah, I've heard you say that.
I'm not a big economist, and I let other people worry about that, and I'm not going to deny economics is like the most important thing ever.
Yeah, no, I understand and respect that. I think with me, it's a question of I focus on things where I think I can, not single-handedly.
Move the needle.
I can move, yeah. Whereas culturally, there's nothing I feel like I can contribute to that. I wish I would like to see the culture move in a different direction, but there's nothing I can do for that. But I can help people understand some things, how the world works in some ways, because that's the way my brain works. And so I focus on the things where I feel like I can make. I mean, for example, these are minor things, but they're not nothing. I do think that the work that I did on state nullification, I do think that that has influenced actual real life events. I think
you mean like Monica Crowley's book?
Yeah. she was only plagiarizing what I said about labor unions.
Oh, sorry.
But let's get that all straight. But seriously, and I mean, whether it was medical marijuana or right to try laws or whatever, I mean, there are a whole bunch of different sorts of things that people did at the state level they weren't really so-called allowed to be doing, but that they did resisting the federal government. There are so many of them who were influenced by my book on that subject or my talks. I mean, I met. It's not like I boast about meeting with politicians, but I met with governors to talk about this stuff, secretly, of course. We can't let this out. But like that's a big thing. And so I can do that. So I focus on that.
Okay. I'm going to tell you an irrational fear I have.
Okay.
Okay. Which I've never articulated before.
Okay.
When I was working with Matt Hughes, the UFC fighter, born again Christian, amazing guy. His fans were very heavily Christian and like doctrinaire Christian, and they didn't know what to make of our friendship. And they fairly thought that I was somewhat of a bad influence on him, right? Because I'm obviously not a Christian, nor am I socially conservative in any way. So my big fear when I talk to you a lot about this stuff is that you are going to perceive it, or maybe there's going to be a point reached and it retroactively changes, that you're going to hear me as like the devil in your ear whispering you and kind of like taking you off the wrong path.
That's really interesting to hear you say that.
Yeah, it's true.
But
that's how I think. That's my concern. Okay,
first of all, that's not going to happen.
You don't know that.
Okay, I can't 100% tell you that's not going to happen, but 99.9 with a bar over it is going to happen. Because at a fundamental level, I think I know you.
Right, that's true.
And and I get kind of where you're coming from, and I know who you are, and I know that in a pinch you come through for people, and I know that when I asked Matt Welch on my show, I mean, Matt sat in this chair, and I was over here when we were talking to you, and the first thing I asked him on my show was, what's your favorite thing about Michael Malice?
Yeah.
And by the way, I led up to that so beautifully. I said, look, Matt, you and I have been tiptoeing around this for too long. I got to just be blunt with you. And he's thinking, oh my gosh, is this Rothbard? Is this what is this going to be? And I said, what's your favorite thing about Michael Malice? And he said his loyalty.
Yeah.
And that would have been one of the first things I thought of too. Because I won't say the name, but the first day I ever met you, I made a somewhat disparaging remark about somebody who I didn't realize meant a lot to you. And you could have just let that go because it's just conversation and but you gently intervened and corrected me.
I don't even remember this.
I'll tell you after.
Okay, yeah.
And I remember being very impressed because, I mean, when you're just getting to know somebody, you try to, be as congenial as possible and try to avoid conflict. But you stopped and corrected me to make sure I understood that I was not properly assessing this person. And I thought,
It was Bob Murphy. I said, Tom.
Who else?
I said, Tom, he's not funny at all. You're completely wrong.
But I mean, I don't think I explicitly thought of it at the time, but later on it occurred to me, if he was willing to do that for that person, he would do it for me.
Yeah, but you have it backwards, because the human mind, right, how it works is, let's suppose at a certain point something happens, you've had it with me. Retroactively it becomes, oh, he's just working the long con. You've read Jonathan Haidt, haven't you?
Yeah.
The Righteous Mind?
Yeah, I have.
So basically all it becomes is like, oh, look, he's just really good at it.
But see, in that case, you would have
Or
to
am
be
I just being paranoid?
you would have to be a sociopath to have gone to that much
I am
trouble.
charming. Thank you.
I mean, all the crap I've called you on the phone about, that we've talked about, that you've helped me work through. If that was part of a long con, then you are the most amazing con man ever.
Do you know what it is then? This is something in my head that I'm probably thinking of some relationship I've had that I'm not privy to consciously. And I'm going to have to sit and think about this because this is coming from someplace in my head. And I'm ascribing it to you.
But the thing is, Michael, I've had the reverse thought about you.
What, that I'm an angel? Michael is a fallen angel. No, he's not fallen. He's
But I
Saint
mean,
Michael.
I've thought that there could come a time where I just have to come right out and say to you, look, Michael, I am just dead set against blah, 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 and that becomes an issue.
It would never become an issue.
All right.
I can't think about anything.
You want to give me a hug?
No. Virtual hugs. This has been very, I think it's really, I really enjoy as a listener when shows I'm a fan of, they don't talk about the stuff they always talk about.
Yeah, I wish I was better prepped for this.
Well, I don't think there is a good prep because this is like both of us are on the couch and we don't have and I honestly thought you'd right away have all these answers and be like, oh, you'd help me understand you. And you're like, I don't know either.
Yeah, it's a good, so now I have to kind of make a reckoning of myself and think this stuff through a bit more.
Okay. I did. Okay. Well,
well, maybe I could write an ebook on it. That would help me clear my mind.
All right. Thank you, Tom, so much. Thank you all for watching. I will see you next week. We've got a Democratic Socialist here. You are welcome.